In March 2024, Wang Hai, deputy commander of the People's Liberation Army Air Force, made a confident announcement. He said China's H-20 stealth bomber is almost here. Chinese state media amplified the message. They said the long-awaited strategic stealth bomber faces no technological bottlenecks and that its unveiling would shock Taiwan and demonstrate China's arrival as a true aerospace superpower. The H-20 has been promised for years. Officially announced in 2016, the bomber has been described as comparable to America's B-2 Spirit, a flying wing design with advanced stealth characteristics, intercontinental range, and the ability to penetrate sophisticated air defenses. Chinese military commentators describe scenarios where H-20s strike deep into the Pacific, destroy U.S. bases, and fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Western Pacific. The bomber's specifications, as touted by Chinese sources, sound formidable. They include a range of approximately 8,500 kilometers, the capacity to carry precision-guided munitions and potentially nuclear weapons, stealth characteristics that make it nearly invisible to radar, and production plans that could eventually reach hundreds of aircraft. But there is a peculiar problem with China's advanced stealth bomber. 9 years after its official announcement, nobody has actually seen it fly. The H-20 remains invisible. The bomber did not appear at the 2024 Zhuhai Air Show despite speculation it might debut there. U.S. intelligence assessments say the H-20 will not be operational until the 2030s at the earliest. Pentagon officials downplay it as not really a concern and say China has run into a lot of engineering design challenges. Today, we will examine why China's promised stealth bomber remains invisible after 9 years, what that reveals about China's aerospace capabilities versus propaganda, and why building something that looks stealthy and building something that actually works as a stealth bomber are entirely different challenges. By the end, you will understand why the H-20 is the plane that vanished into a gap between Chinese ambitions and engineering reality. Let us start with what China claims about the H-20 and when they promised it would arrive. Tracking the timeline reveals a pattern of perpetual delay disguised as imminent arrival. The H-20 program was officially acknowledged in 2016 when a Chinese state television documentary featured Air Force Commander Ma Xiaotian mentioning development of a new generation long-range bomber. Chinese media immediately began speculating about capabilities, comparing the project to America's B-2 Spirit and describing a flying wing design optimized for stealth. Over subsequent years, the timeline kept promising imminent revelation. In 2018, state media suggested the bomber would be unveiled soon. In 2020, analysts predicted it would appear within 1 or 2 years. In 2022, claims circulated that prototypes were already flying. By 2024, Deputy Commander Wang Hai declared the H-20 almost here and said there were no technological bottlenecks. Yet here we are, approaching 2026, and the H-20 remains invisible. No confirmed prototype has flown. No official specifications have been released. No images exist beyond fan-made CGI renders and speculative illustrations. For a program supposedly nearing completion with no technological barriers, there is remarkably little evidence that it exists in flyable form. Compare this to the United States B-21 Raider, the new stealth bomber that the H-20 supposedly rivals. The B-21 was officially announced in 2015. It conducted its first flight in November 2023, and it is on track for operational deployment by 2026. That's roughly similar timeframes for announcement and development, except the B-21 actually exists, it actually flies, and it is actually progressing toward operational status. China announced the H-20 in 2016. 9 years later, there are exactly 0 confirmed prototype flights, no official images of an actual aircraft, and no credible evidence of progress beyond confident statements from officials. Now let's examine what U.S. intelligence actually assesses about the H-20, because Pentagon officials are not impressed by Chinese claims. According to U.S. defense officials familiar with intelligence assessments, the H-20 is not really a concern at this stage. That is not because stealth bombers are not important. They absolutely are. It is because U.S. intelligence believes China has run into a lot of engineering design challenges that have stalled the program significantly. Pentagon assessments suggest the H-20, if it ever reaches operational status, will be nowhere near as good as U.S. low observable platforms like the B-2 or B-21. This is not American bragging. It is a sober assessment based on understanding what makes stealth bombers actually work versus what makes them merely look impressive in concept art. One defense analyst familiar with bomber development put it bluntly, "It is comparatively easy to produce something that looks like a stealth fighter-ish thing that will fly. But making something that actually functions as an effective, survivable, long-range stealth bomber is exponentially harder and requires aerospace expertise China has not demonstrated." U.S. intelligence now assesses the H-20 will not be operational until the 2030s at the earliest, potentially mid to late 2030s. That is not imminent. That is more than a decade away, and even that timeline assumes China overcomes the engineering challenges that have apparently stalled the program for years. The gap between Chinese officials declaring almost here and U.S. intelligence saying decade plus away reveals either massive intelligence failure on one side or massive propaganda on the other. Given China's track record of announced capabilities that fail to materialize on schedule, the propaganda explanation seems more credible. Let's talk about the specific technical challenges that make stealth bombers so difficult, because this is where Chinese claims collide with engineering reality. Building a flying wing bomber isn't just about aerodynamic shaping. The B-2 Spirit represents decades of accumulated aerospace expertise in material science, computational fluid dynamics, radar cross-section reduction, engine integration, flight control systems, and countless other specialized domains. Stealth isn't just about shape, though that matters enormously. It's about materials that absorb radar rather than reflecting it. It's about engine inlet design that hides turbine blades from radar. It's about eliminating gaps, seams, and surface discontinuities that create radar returns. It's about managing infrared signature so the bomber is not detected by heat-seeking sensors. It's about integrating all of these requirements while maintaining aerodynamic stability, structural integrity, and operational reliability. According to defense analysts, China faces specific bottlenecks. Engine technology remains a persistent Chinese weakness. Building engines powerful enough to propel a large flying wing bomber while maintaining low infrared signature and integrating with serpentine inlet ducts for radar reduction is extraordinarily challenging. China's struggles with jet engine development, evident in fighter programs like the J-20, translate directly to bomber challenges. Stealth coatings represent another major obstacle. Radar-absorbent materials must work across multiple frequency bands, survive extreme temperatures and atmospheric conditions, require manageable maintenance, and not degrade too rapidly with exposure. American stealth aircraft have faced coating maintenance challenges for decades despite enormous investment in material science. China is trying to replicate or exceed this capability without the foundational expertise that took America decades to build. Flight control for flying wing aircraft is notoriously complex. Without conventional tail surfaces, bombers like the B-2 rely entirely on computer-controlled flight systems managing tiny adjustments across multiple control surfaces. The software, sensors, and actuators must work flawlessly because human pilots cannot manually compensate for instability. This requires sophisticated flight control expertise that China is still developing. Range and payload requirements create structural challenges. A strategic bomber must carry heavy weapons loads across intercontinental distances while maintaining stealth characteristics. This demands lightweight but strong structures, efficient engines, advanced aerodynamics, and careful weight management. Every ton of structural weight is payload or fuel you cannot carry. Getting this optimization right requires extensive modeling, testing, and iteration. Now let's examine what actually appeared that some observers confused with the H-20, because it reveals how desperate people are to find evidence this bomber exists. At various points, mysterious aircraft sightings in China triggered speculation about H-20 prototypes. Blurry satellite images showing covered aircraft at test facilities sparked breathless analysis. Every Zhuhai air show promised a potential H-20 debut, generating articles and videos speculating about an imminent unveiling. In 2024, China unveiled a mysterious flying wing aircraft designated GJ-X at the Zhuhai Air Show. The shape looked bomber-like, a sleek flying wing design that generated immediate speculation. This was finally the H-20, or a technology demonstrator related to the bomber program. Except it was not. The GJ-X is a drone, an unmanned combat aerial vehicle, not a strategic bomber. While potentially significant in its own right, it is not the H-20, and it does not validate claims about bomber development progress. The fact that observers were so quick to assume this drone was the long-promised bomber reveals how little actual evidence exists for H-20 development. This pattern repeats constantly in Chinese military aviation. Promises of revolutionary systems, speculation feeding on minimal evidence, and eventual revelation of something far less impressive than hyped. The H-20 appears to be following exactly this pattern, confident official statements unsupported by actual hardware. Let's compare the H-20 timeline to America's B-21 development because the contrast is devastating. The B-21 Raider was officially announced in 2015 as the Long-Range Strike Bomber program. Northrop Grumman received the contract in 2016. Development proceeded with regular updates, testimony before Congress, budget allocations, and progress reports, all while the actual aircraft remained highly classified. In December 2022, the first B-21 was publicly unveiled in a ceremony at Northrop Grumman's Palmdale, California facility. This was not CGI or concept art, it was actual hardware, a real aircraft that people could see. In November 2023, the B-21 conducted its maiden flight. By late 2024, the aircraft was conducting regular test flights from Edwards Air Force Base, validating systems and advancing toward operational capability projected for 2026. That is approximately 11 years from program announcement to anticipated operational status, with clear milestones hit at regular intervals. Contract award, design reviews, construction, rollout, first flight, testing, and production. China announced the H-20 in 2016, a roughly similar time frame to the B-21. But 9 years later, China has produced 0 confirmed prototypes, 0 public unveiling of actual hardware, 0 confirmed test flights, and 0 credible timeline for operational deployment. U.S. intelligence says, potentially in the 2030s, which would be 14 to 19 years from announcement to operational status, assuming it happens at all. The B-21 exists. It flies. It is progressing toward operational deployment. The H-20, after a similar development time, remains entirely absent from the observable world. If China had made comparable progress to America, we would see evidence. The fact that we see nothing after 9 years and constant promises of imminent arrival suggests the program is either severely troubled or largely fictional. Now let's talk about why China keeps promising the H-20 is coming soon, despite an apparent lack of progress, because the incentives explain the behavior. Chinese military leadership faces enormous pressure to demonstrate that China is catching up with or surpassing American military capabilities. Strategic stealth bombers represent a critical gap in Chinese capabilities. America operates them, and China does not. Acknowledging this gap is uncomfortable. Promising the gap will close soon is much more satisfying. Officials can claim progress without accountability because the program is classified. Nobody outside the program can definitively prove the bomber does not exist or is not progressing. Officials make confident claims, state media amplifies them, and the lack of evidence is explained away as necessary security rather than possible failure. For Chinese domestic audiences, H-20 promises serve propaganda purposes. They reassure Chinese citizens that China is matching American military power, and they deter potential adversaries by suggesting capabilities that may not actually exist. For Chinese leadership, the promises signal to regional neighbors that China's military power continues growing, potentially affecting their strategic calculations. But at some point, promises must produce actual aircraft. The longer the H-20 remains invisible, the harder it becomes to maintain credibility. 9 years is pushing the limits of how long you can promise imminent arrival without delivering actual hardware. So what does the H-20's absence reveal about Chinese aerospace capabilities and military modernization? First, it reveals genuine limitations in Chinese aerospace technology. Building advanced stealth bombers requires expertise China apparently does not yet possess. Despite massive investment, industrial capacity, and espionage efforts to steal Western technology, China cannot simply replicate American stealth bombers on demand. The engineering is too complex, the accumulated expertise too deep, and the shortcuts that might work for other systems are insufficient for this challenge. Second, it demonstrates that Chinese military modernization remains uneven. China has achieved genuine capabilities in some domains, such as shipbuilding, ballistic missiles, and certain fighter aircraft. But in other domains, particularly advanced aerospace systems like stealth bombers, China remains far behind American capabilities despite propaganda suggesting otherwise. Third, it shows that propaganda timelines and engineering timelines do not align. Chinese officials often promise systems on schedules driven by political needs rather than technical realities. The H-20 is described as almost here because claiming so serves Chinese interests, not because the bomber actually approaches operational status. Fourth, it reveals persistent problems with engine technology and advanced materials. Those are bottlenecks that affect multiple programs. The H-20's apparent delays likely stem from the same engine and materials challenges that have slowed Chinese fighter development, magnified by the bomber's greater size, range, and complexity requirements. Now, let's address what this analysis does not mean because accuracy requires nuance. This does not mean China will never build a stealth bomber. Given enough time, investment, and development, China could eventually overcome current limitations and field an operational stealth bomber. The question is when and whether it will be competitive with American equivalents when it arrives. This does not mean the H-20 does not exist at all. Some level of development has likely occurred, including paper studies, wind tunnel testing, and component development or demonstrator aircraft. The issue is not whether any work has been done, but whether the program has progressed anywhere near as far as Chinese officials claim. This does not mean Chinese aerospace has made no progress. China has demonstrated genuine advancement in various aviation domains. The issue is the gap between actual progress and claimed progress, between real capabilities and propaganda narratives. But it does mean that 9 years after the official announcement in 2016, China has failed to demonstrate a flyable H-20 prototype, while America's comparable B-21 Raider has already flown. It means U.S. intelligence assesses China faces major engineering challenges that have stalled the program. and it means Chinese promises of imminent arrival should be treated with extreme skepticism until actual evidence emerges. So what is the bottom line on China's vanishing stealth bomber? In 2016, China announced development of the H-20 strategic stealth bomber. Over the following 9 years, Chinese officials repeatedly promised the bomber was nearing completion, facing no technological barriers, and would soon shock adversaries with its capabilities. Deputy commanders made confident statements, state media amplified the message, and analysts predicted imminent unveiling. Yet 9 years later, no confirmed H-20 prototype has flown. No actual aircraft has been publicly displayed. No credible evidence exists that the program has progressed beyond early development stages. U.S. intelligence assesses that the bomber, if it ever becomes operational, will not arrive until the 2030s at the earliest, and that it will not match American low-observable platform capabilities. Meanwhile, America's B-21 Raider, announced around the same time, has completed its first flight, is conducting regular testing, and is on track for operational deployment by 2026. The comparison between what America promised and delivered versus what China promised and failed to deliver could not be more stark. The H-20 represents a pattern we have seen repeatedly. China announces impressive capabilities, promises imminent arrival, generates propaganda value from the announcement, and then struggles to deliver actual hardware that works as advertised. Sometimes systems eventually arrive but fall short of claims. Sometimes they arrive so late they are obsolete on delivery. Sometimes, like the H-20 so far, they simply vanish into the gap between propaganda and engineering reality. It is comparatively easy to produce something that looks like a stealth fighter-ish thing that will fly. That is apparently what Chinese officials believe they can do, produce an aircraft that looks stealthy enough to generate impressive photos and propaganda narratives. But making something that actually functions as an effective, survivable, long-range stealth bomber requires aerospace expertise demonstrated through decades of accumulated experience, which China has not yet achieved. The H-20 is the plane that vanished, promised confidently for 9 years, yet never appearing, delayed indefinitely while officials continue claiming imminent arrival. Until actual evidence emerges, such as prototype flights, official images, or credible technical demonstrations, the H-20 should be treated as vaporware, impressive in concept, absent in reality, and unlikely to materialize on the timelines Chinese propaganda suggests. Do not forget to subscribe for more analysis. Separating aerospace propaganda from engineering reality. Thanks for watching.